In the grand narrative of Roman history, the names of emperors echo endlessly through marble halls and dusty scrolls. Augustus, Tiberius, Claudius, Nero. These men shaped an empire that ruled the known world. Yet behind their names, behind the statues, decrees, and battles, there were figures whose power was less visible, but just as decisive. They were the women of the imperial household, the empresses, mothers, and wives whose quiet influence often determined the fate of Rome itself. Among them stood one woman whose life marked the very beginning of the imperial age, a woman who understood that true power was not always worn like a crown, but wielded like a whisper. Her name was Livia Drusilla. Livia was born into privilege in 58 BCE, during the dying years of the Roman Republic. Her father, Marcus Livius Drusus Claudianus, was a man of influence, connected to the noble Claudian family, one of the oldest and most conservative lineages in Rome. From birth, Livia was trained to embody Roman virtue, chastity, loyalty, intelligence, and restraint, qualities the Romans celebrated in theory, but rarely rewarded with power. Yet, through wit and careful calculation, she would become the matriarch of Rome's first imperial dynasty, the Julio-Claudians, and leave an indelible mark on history as the woman who stood beside Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. When Livia first entered the stage of Roman politics, the world was in turmoil. The Republic was collapsing, torn apart by civil wars that pitted powerful generals against one another. Caesar against Pompey, Antony against Octavian. Livia was still young when Julius Caesar was assassinated, and the fragile peace that followed was shattered by ambition and betrayal. At 17, she was already married to Tiberius Claudius Nero, an older man who sided with Caesar's assassins. When Octavian, Caesar's heir and the future Augustus, rose to power, Livia's family became political refugees. Forced to flee Rome, she gave birth to her first son, Tiberius, in exile, the same Tiberius who would one day rule Rome's emperor. When she returned to Rome, Octavian saw her and was immediately captivated. The ancient sources tell us that he was struck not only by her beauty, but by her composure and intelligence. At the time, she was still married, and Octavian himself was married to Scribonia, who had just given birth to his daughter Julia. Yet, in a move that shocked Roman society, Octavian divorced Scribonia and arranged for Livia to divorce her husband. Only 3 days after her second marriage was legally dissolved, Livia married Octavian. It was a scandal by Roman standards, but it was also the beginning of one of the most powerful political partnerships in history. Unlike many women in ancient Rome, Livia was not content to remain a passive ornament. She understood her husband's ambitions and shared his vision of restoring order to a chaotic world. As Octavian transformed into Augustus, the first emperor, Livia became his trusted advisor, confidant, and political ally. She was present at court, managing the domestic side of imperial politics, arranging marriages, cultivating alliances, and ensuring loyalty within the family. In an empire ruled by men, her influence operated in the shadows, subtle and profound. Livia's strength lay in her ability to embody the ideal Roman matron while quietly bending the world to her will. She dressed simply, spoke with restraint, and avoided ostentation. The poet Ovid and the historian Tacitus both remarked on her dignity, her calm presence, and her ability to command respect without ever appearing to seek it. Augustus relied on her counsel, and though she rarely appeared in public affairs, her fingerprints were everywhere. She became the quiet architect of dynastic politics, ensuring the continuity of Augustus's line through her sons. Her ambition, however, was not without controversy. Ancient historians, particularly Tacitus, accused her of manipulating Augustus and even of orchestrating the deaths of potential heirs to secure the throne for her own son, Tiberius. Whether these accusations were true or born of rumor and misogyny remains uncertain. But what is undeniable is that Livia navigated the treacherous world of imperial succession with unmatched skill. In a time when the wrong word could mean death, she managed to survive and thrive at the heart of Roman power for more than 50 years. As the years passed, Augustus became increasingly reliant on her. She was with him through victories and defeats, through the transformation of Rome from a republic to an empire. When Augustus took the title of princeps, or first citizen, and reshaped the political system, Livia became the living embodiment of the new imperial virtue. She represented stability and moral purity, the domestic counterpart to Augustus's political reforms. Statues of her began to appear across the empire, depicting her as a goddess-like figure, serene and maternal, the protector of the Roman family. Behind the scenes, she was anything but passive. She carefully managed the marriages and alliances of her family, arranging unions that would strengthen the dynasty. Her son Tiberius was married to Julia, Augustus's daughter from his first marriage, tying the Claudian and Julian bloodlines together. Yet this marriage was an unhappy one, filled with jealousy and resentment. Julia's notorious affairs and Tiberius's coldness drove them apart, and Livia's position between them became increasingly complicated. Still, she held firm, ensuring that her son remained close to Augustus and that his claim to succession stayed alive. The question of succession was the great burden of Augustus's reign. The emperor had no surviving sons of his own, and his attempts to groom heirs from his extended family often ended in tragedy. His grandsons Gaius and Lucius, whom he adopted as sons, both died young under mysterious circumstances. Some later writers accused Livia of involvement, suggesting she removed rivals to clear the path for Tiberius. The evidence is thin, but the rumors persisted for centuries, painting her as the archetypal scheming empress, beautiful, intelligent, and ruthlessly ambitious. Whether or not she committed such acts, it is clear that she was a master of survival in a world that devoured the weak. When Augustus finally died in 14 CE, Livia's influence reached its peak. In his will, he adopted Tiberius as his son and heir, ensuring that her lineage would continue on the throne. He also left Livia a share of his estate and granted her the title Augusta, an honorific never before given to a woman. She became not just the widow of the emperor, but an institution unto herself, the living symbol of the Augustan legacy. The Senate decreed that she be honored alongside her late husband, and her name was invoked in prayers and ceremonies across the empire. For the first time in Roman history, a woman was recognized as a co-founder of imperial power. Tiberius's reign, however, brought new challenges. Her son, though a capable general, was a brooding and reluctant ruler. His relationship with his mother was strained, filled with tension and mutual distrust. Tacitus tells us that Tiberius resented Livia's continued influence, feeling overshadowed even after becoming emperor. She still received visitors, mediated political disputes, and corresponded with provincial governors, all signs of her enduring authority. To some, she appeared as the true ruler behind the throne, the empress who had outlived her husband, but not her power. As she grew older, Livia became a near-mythic figure in Roman society. She was seen as the embodiment of the imperial ideal, disciplined, loyal, and eternal. Yet her image was double-edged. To the poets and moralists, she was the model of Roman virtue. To the cynics and chroniclers, she was the manipulative matriarch who ruled with whispers and poison. The truth likely lay somewhere in between. Livia understood better than anyone that survival in Rome required a delicate balance between obedience and control, between the appearance of virtue and the exercise of power. In 29 CE, at the age of 86, Livia Drusilla died, having lived through the reigns of two emperors and witnessed the birth of an empire that would endure for centuries. Tiberius, perhaps out of resentment, delayed her deification and refused to attend her funeral personally. But the people of Rome remembered her as the mother of the empire. Later emperors, including Claudius, would formally deify her, elevating her among the gods as Diva Augusta. Statues of her were erected in temples, and her cult was maintained for generations. She became not merely a woman of history, but a symbol, the first and greatest of Rome's empresses, the silent architect of the imperial house. Livia's legacy set the pattern for those who came after her. She demonstrated that a Roman empress could shape history not through direct command, but through influence, persuasion, and patience. In her footsteps would follow a line of women, some noble, some notorious, who learned how to rule in a world that denied them the title of ruler. They would learn from Livia that the corridors of power are not always marked by open doors, but by shadows and silence, and that the throne itself often rests on the hands of those unseen. Her example would echo through the next generations. The women of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, from her granddaughter-in-law, Agrippina the Elder, to her great-granddaughter, Agrippina the Younger, would inherit not just her blood, but her understanding of imperial politics. They would wield influence with charm and cunning, continuing the legacy of the empress, who had turned the art of survival into the art of rule. But in the centuries that followed, Livia's name was both revered and reviled. Historians debated whether she was a saintly mother of Rome or the original imperial schemer, the prototype for every ambitious woman who dared to move the gears of power. Plays and novels would later portray her as a manipulative figure, the archetype of the dangerous empress, while modern scholars began to reclaim her as a political genius who mastered the impossible game of Roman politics. Whatever the interpretation, one fact remains unshuckable. Without Livia, there could be no imperial Rome as we know it. She built not monuments but legacies, not armies but alliances. Her influence was not shouted but whispered, carried through the generations in the subtle, invisible thread of power that runs through every empire. The Rome of Augustus may have been built on laws and legions, but it was sustained by the quiet authority of the woman who shared his bed and shaped his world. And so begins the story of Rome's forgotten empresses, women who stood at the edge of history's spotlight yet guided its beam. Livia Drusilla was the first, the mother of all empresses, the matriarch who defined what it meant to wield power behind the throne. In the centuries to come, others would rise in her image, women who would command armies with a glance, who would shape emperors and destinies alike, who would transform the empire from within. Their names would be whispered in corridors and condemned in chronicles, but their influence would never die. For every emperor who ruled in marble and gold, there was an empress in shadow, unseen, unthroned, but unforgettable. Agrippina the Elder was born into a world where power and peril walked hand in hand. She was the granddaughter of Augustus and the daughter of Julia, the emperor's only child. Her lineage alone made her extraordinary, but her spirit, her fierce independence, and her iron will would make her unforgettable. She was the daughter of a fallen line, the granddaughter of the first emperor of Rome, and she inherited from him both ambition and defiance. Yet in a world still defined by men, she learned to turn loyalty, love, and vengeance into her own weapons. Her father was Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, Augustus's trusted general and closest ally, a man whose victories had secured the emperor's throne. From him, Agrippina inherited the soldier's discipline and the commander's sense of duty. From her mother Julia, she inherited passion and the curse of being too visible in a world that feared powerful women. Julia had been disgraced by Augustus for her scandals and sent into exile, a punishment meant as both warning and example. Agrippina the Elder watched her mother's fall, and she understood early that survival in Rome was not granted to women who sought freedom, only to those who could cloak their fire in virtue. As she grew, Agrippina became known for her intelligence and her devotion to family. Augustus admired her, seeing in her the best parts of her father's strength and her own political insight. When she married Germanicus, the handsome, charismatic general and heir of the Julio-Claudian line, It seemed as though destiny had chosen her for greatness. Germanicus was adored by the legions and beloved by the people, a man of honor, courage, and generosity. Together, they became Rome's golden couple, the very embodiment of Augustan virtue. They traveled with their children across the empire, from Gaul to the Rhine, inspiring loyalty wherever they went. But the light that shines brightest often casts the darkest shadows. The Emperor Tiberius, her stepfather, watched their growing popularity with unease. He had inherited the throne reluctantly from Augustus, overshadowed by his mother Livia's influence and burdened by suspicion of every rival. Germanicus's fame and Agrippina's nobility threatened his fragile rule. When Germanicus was sent to the eastern provinces, it was meant as both promotion and warning. He went, loyal to Rome as always, but he did not return alive. In 19 CE, Germanicus died suddenly in Syria, under circumstances so suspicious that few believed it natural. Agrippina was convinced that he had been poisoned by agents of Tiberius or his minister Piso. Her grief turned to fury, and she vowed to bring those responsible to justice. She carried her husband's ashes back to Rome herself, traveling across the empire as a living symbol of loyalty and loss. Crowds gathered to weep for her, to honor Germanicus, and to curse those they believed guilty. The Senate opened investigations, and Piso, accused of treason, killed himself before the verdict was read. Agrippina had won the people's hearts and the emperor's hatred. From that moment on, she became both heroine and threat. She refused to bow to Tiberius or to his court of flatterers. She spoke openly, demanded justice, and never hid her contempt for corruption. In a society that valued silence in women, her voice was her defiance. She raised her children, including her daughter Agrippina the Younger, with pride and ambition, telling them that the blood of Augustus flowed in their veins. But Rome had no tolerance for women who refused to yield. Tiberius, hardened and paranoid, saw in her not a grieving widow, but a rival. Her popularity among the people made her dangerous, and her pride made her vulnerable. Slowly, methodically, he began to isolate her. Her allies were accused of treason, her friends exiled, and her influence eroded. She fought back with all the courage of her father and the intelligence of her grandfather, but the emperor's machinery of fear was too strong. When she refused to eat at the emperor's table for fear of poison, rumors spread that she plotted rebellion. The same woman once hailed as Rome's ideal matron was now branded as disloyal. Tiberius exiled her to the island of Pandateria, the same bleak prison where her mother had died years earlier. There, far from the city whose loyalty she had once commanded, Agrippina wasted away. Accounts differ on how she died. Some say starvation, others beatings, but all agree that her end was cruel. Ashes were later returned to Rome, but her spirit lived on in her daughter, Agrippina the Younger, who had learned from her mother's fate that the only way to survive in Rome was to master its cruelty. Agrippina the Younger grew up surrounded by death and betrayal. She was born in 15 CE, the same year her grandfather Germanicus celebrated his triumph in Rome, and she inherited from her parents both nobility and vengeance. As a child, she watched her father's murder destroy her family and her mother's courage crumble under the weight of imperial suspicion. She understood what Rome demanded of women: obedience, beauty, silence, and she decided she would give Rome everything it expected and then take everything it denied her. Her lineage made her valuable, but also dangerous. She was a direct descendant of Augustus and the sister of Caligula, who would one day become emperor. When she married Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, she entered into a cold, political union that would produce one of Rome's most infamous rulers, Nero. Yet before Nero's birth, Agrippina's life would take a darker path. When Tiberius died, his successor was her brother Caligula, a man whose early promise quickly dissolved into madness. At first, Agrippina enjoyed her brother's favor. She and her sisters were elevated to near-divine status, their images displayed on coins, and their names celebrated in festivals. But Caligula's paranoia soon consumed him, and his own family became his greatest threat. Agrippina and her sister Livia were accused of plotting against him, stripped of their wealth and exiled. Once again, the women of Livia's line found themselves prisoners of the very power they helped sustain. But Agrippina was not her mother. She had learned that endurance was not enough. One had to wait, to calculate, to strike when the time was right. In exile, she survived by cunning and restraint. She watched others die, and she learned patience, the cruelest but most necessary virtue in Rome. When Caligula was assassinated in 41 CE, and her uncle Claudius took the throne, Agrippina saw her chance to return. Claudius, the scholar emperor, was older, cautious, and easily influenced by those around him. Agrippina, recently widowed, played her role with precision. She approached him not as a rival, but as a niece seeking reconciliation. Her charm, intelligence, and understanding of court politics soon won him over. Within a year, she married her uncle, a union shocking even by Roman standards, and became empress. But this marriage was more than scandal. It was strategy. Agrippina knew that Claudius was surrounded by advisors and freedmen who sought to control him. She needed to outmaneuver them all. She began by eliminating her rivals, using her influence to secure the execution or exile of those who opposed her. She promoted her own allies, ensured her enemies' downfall, and strengthened her public image as the loyal wife and devoted mother. Coins were minted showing her face alongside Claudius, sage, a gesture of equality unprecedented for a Roman woman. The empire had never seen an empress so visible, so commanding, so unapologetically powerful. But Agrippina's ambitions reached beyond her husband's throne. She wanted to secure the future for her son, Nero. Claudius had a biological son, Britannicus, but Agrippina knew that blood alone did not guarantee succession. Influence did. She persuaded Claudius to adopt Nero, making him heir. From that moment, her control over the empire tightened. She guided Claudius's decisions, managed public ceremonies, and even appeared beside him in official acts, a sign that she was no longer just the emperor's consort. She was his partner in rule. Yet such dominance breeds resentment. The Senate whispered that she was overstepping, that she ruled Claudius rather than served him. Her enemies plotted against her, and rumors began to spread that she had taken her power too far. But Agrippina had learned from her mother's downfall and Livia's example. When cornered, act decisively. In 54 CE, Claudius died suddenly after eating a meal prepared by his household. Ancient sources, most famously Tacitus and Suetonius, claimed that Agrippina had poisoned him with mushrooms, the food of the gods. Whether or not the tale is true, its symbolism is undeniable. With Claudius's death, Nero, her 17-year-old son, ascended the throne, and Agrippina achieved what no woman before her had ever done. She had created an emperor. In the early years of Nero's reign, Agrippina wielded unprecedented authority. She sat beside her son during Senate meetings, signed official documents, and received foreign ambassadors. Statues depicted them together, as if mother and son ruled jointly. Coins bore both their profiles. Rome had never seen such a thing. A woman sharing imperial imagery, appearing as co-sovereign of the empire. For a moment, Agrippina was the most powerful person in the world, but the empire has no room for equals, and Nero soon chafed under his mother's control. As he grew older, he fell under the influence of his advisors, Seneca, Maurus, and others who saw Agrippina as a threat. She criticized his indulgences, tried to curb his extravagance, and reminded him constantly that he owed everything to her. The bond that had once been her greatest strength became her most dangerous weakness. Nero's resentment grew into fear. He began to see her not as his protector, but as a rival. Their conflict became a spectacle of whispers and deceit. Agrippina, sensing her danger, tried to reassert her influence by aligning herself with potential allies, even hinting that Britannicus Claudius's son was the rightful heir. It was a fatal miscalculation. Britannicus was poisoned soon after, and Agrippina's position began to crumble. Nero stripped her of her honors, dismissed her guards, and banished her from court. But exile could not silence Agrippina. Her very existence was a threat. The young emperor, once her creation, now plotted her destruction. What followed would become one of the most infamous murders in Roman history. According to legend, Nero first attempted to have her killed in secret. He sent her a lavish ship designed to collapse at sea, but Agrippina survived, swimming to shore and returning home. Bruised but defiant, it was as if the gods themselves refused to let her die unseen. Enraged, Nero ordered soldiers to finish the task. They broke into her villa under cover of night. Tacitus describes the final moment. Agrippina, realizing what was to come, bared her chest and said, "Strike here, where the son I bore struck me." She was killed by her own creation, the emperor she had made. Agrippina the Younger died as she had lived, powerful, unyielding, and defiant to the end. Her death marked the end of an era in which imperial women ruled from the shadows, yet her legacy was inescapable. Even as Nero tried to erase her memory, her story endured. She was the culmination of the line that began with Livia, the woman who had watched, learned, and mastered the art of ruling from behind the throne. In Agrippina, Rome saw both its fear and its fascination with female power. She embodied everything the empire admired: intelligence, strength, ambition, and everything it feared: independence, control, and the will to rule. To her enemies, she was a monster. To history, she became a legend. Her life was not just the story of one woman's ambition, but of an empire that could never fully silence its empresses. Through her mother, and through every woman who dared to shape history from the margins, Rome revealed its greatest paradox, that even in a world built for men, women found ways to rule it. And though their names were whispered, their influence was undeniable. Because in the Empire of Rome, the throne was never empty, not while there was still an empress in the shadows. The empire was at the height of its grandeur. Marble shone in the sunlight, legions marched under the imperial banners, and Rome ruled over a world that stretched from the misty forests of Britannia to the burning sands of Egypt. Yet behind the majesty of its emperors, those men whose faces adorned the coins and whose names filled the chronicles, there pulsed another, quieter force. These were the empresses, the women whose whispers could shift the balance of empires, whose ambition could make or unmake emperors. Among them, none shone brighter, nor fell harder, than Agrippina the Younger, the daughter of an empire and the mother of a monster. Agrippina was born into chaos. Her mother, Agrippina the Elder, had been a symbol of dignity and defiance, and her father Germanicus was beloved by the legions. His mysterious death left a wound that never healed, not in Rome and not in his daughter. From her earliest years, Agrippina learned that power was dangerous, but weakness was fatal. When her brothers were executed under Tiberius's paranoid reign, and her mother starved herself in exile, young Agrippina understood that survival in the imperial family required something sharper than loyalty. It required strategy. By the time she reached womanhood, her beauty was matched only by her resolve. She would never be a victim. She would command fate itself. Her first marriage to Gnaeus Domitius Anabarbus was one of arrangement, not affection. He was cruel, arrogant, and as the historians later recorded, a man who could commit any crime and feel no remorse. But he gave her a son, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, the boy who would one day become Emperor Nero. Agrippina, even then, sensed destiny in the child. He was born with features that seemed carved for rule: sharp eyes, a proud jawline, and an aura of something dangerous. The omens at his birth were dark. A solar eclipse, whispers among astrologers of destruction and greatness intertwined. Agrippina would take those whispers and twist them to her purpose. When Caligula, her brother, became emperor, Agrippina's fortunes soared briefly. Caligula's reign began with promise, but quickly descended into madness. He demanded worship as a god, mocked the Senate, and executed at whim. Agrippina, initially close to him, soon found herself in peril as Caligula's paranoia spread even to his own family. Accused of conspiracy, she was exiled to the desolate island of Pontia, her young son taken from her. On that barren rock, surrounded by the endless sea, Agrippina vowed that she would return, not merely to survive, but to reign. Fate granted her that chance when Caligula was assassinated. Claudius, her uncle, the stammering, bookish scholar who had long been dismissed as weak, was raised to the throne. He was a man of learning, but little cunning, precisely the kind of man Agrippina could control. She was recalled to Rome, her beauty now tempered by experience, her ambition sharper than ever. She watched as the imperial court turned into a chessboard. Claudius's wife, Messalina, ruled it like a queen, but a reckless one whose passions would soon destroy her. Messalina was a different breed of empress. Barely 20 when she married Claudius, she possessed an intoxicating blend of charm and cruelty. She reveled in the privileges of power, but lacked the discipline to conceal her vices. The empire whispered of her secret affairs, of lovers who vanished overnight, of men destroyed for glancing too long at her. She surrounded herself with flatterers, poets, and actors, and turned the palace into a theater of decadence. Yet she was also cunning, manipulating Claudius's affection to eliminate rivals. Senators feared her. Noblewomen envied and despised her. She could smile like Venus and strike like a viper, but excess always brings ruin. In 48 CE, her audacity reached its peak. Claudius was away at Ostia, inspecting the harbor, when news reached him that Messalina had married her lover, Gaius Silius, in a public ceremony, while the emperor still lived. It was an act of madness or arrogance beyond comprehension. The court froze in terror. Messalina had overreached. Narcissus, Claudius's freedman and advisor, rushed to warn the emperor, who was at first too shocked to believe it. But when proof arrived, witnesses, documents, even the wedding banquet still underway, Claudius turned pale. His wife, the empress, had humiliated him before all Rome. Narcissus acted swiftly. Messalina was dragged from her gardens, trembling but defiant, still believing her beauty could save her. She demanded to see the emperor, to plead her case, but Narcissus refused. The order came quietly. Her life was to end. Alone in the gardens she loved, surrounded by soldiers, she hesitated, unable to strike herself. A soldier did it for her. Thus ended one of Rome's most infamous empresses. Yet her fall opened the way for another, Agrippina. Claudius, now widowed, was vulnerable. He needed stability, and Agrippina provided it. She approached him with calculated grace, a niece seeking to console an uncle, but every gesture, every word was designed to ensnare. She presented herself as virtuous, disciplined, the antidote to Messalina's chaos. Behind closed doors, however, she lobbied allies, secured the Senate's approval for her marriage to Claudius, a union scandalous for its incestuous nature, and gradually became empress. Once enthroned, Agrippina wasted no time consolidating power. She had her rival, Lalia Paulina, forced to suicide. She arranged alliances, elevated her supporters, and most importantly, persuaded Claudius to adopt her son Nero as his heir, displacing his own son Britannicus. The palace now revolved around Agrippina. She was regal, controlled, untouchable. Coins were minted bearing her face beside Claudius's, an honor no woman before her had received. She sat beside him during public ceremonies, her voice soft but decisive in his ear. Rome began to murmur that the emperor was merely a figurehead, that Agrippina ruled in all but name. And perhaps she did. When foreign ambassadors bowed before Claudius, their eyes often drifted to the woman beside him, the silent power behind the throne. But ambition, like fire, consumes its bearer. As Nero neared manhood, Agrippina's influence became more perilous. Claudius began to reconsider his decision, whispering of restoring Britannicus as heir. He spoke too openly, perhaps too late. In 54 CE, the emperor fell ill after a meal. Some said it was mushrooms, his favorite dish. Others whispered that Agrippina had served them herself, laced with poison. Claudius died that night, and within hours, Agrippina's son Nero was proclaimed emperor. The Senate, the guards, the people, all had been prepared. The Empress Mother had achieved the impossible. She had placed her child upon the throne of the world. At first, Nero's reign seemed promising. Young, handsome, cultured, he was adored by the populace. But behind the curtain, it was Agrippina who ruled. She attended Senate meetings, issued commands in her son's name, and treated the empire as her instrument. Ministers and generals sought her favor before approaching Nero. She dressed like a goddess, received ambassadors as if she were co-emperor, and made it clear that her son owed everything to her. Nero, still a teenager, accepted it for a time, but youth is restless and power intoxicating. As Nero grew into his role, he began to resent the mother who overshadowed him. Agrippina's control became suffocating. She scolded him for his extravagance, opposed his love affairs, and mocked his artistic ambitions. When he took the freedwoman Acta as his mistress, Agrippina raged, threatening to expose his illegitimacy and promote Britannicus instead. But before she could act, Britannicus was found dead during a banquet, poisoned in his cup. Agrippina had taught her son well. The rift widened. Nero surrounded himself with flatterers, Seneca the philosopher, Horus the commander, and others who whispered that Rome would never accept a man ruled by his mother. Agrippina, realizing she was losing control, played a desperate game. She alternately threatened and pleaded, reminding Nero of his debt to her. Rome, by the time of the High Imperial Age, had entered a period of relative stability, but the machinations of power behind the throne had not diminished. In fact, they had grown subtler, more refined, more insidious. For the lessons of the Julio-Claudians had been indelibly etched into the consciousness of every woman who dared to walk the corridors of power, and it was during this era, spanning the reigns from Nerva through Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, that the empresses and imperial wives perfected the art of influence, using diplomacy, charm, and foresight to shape the empire in ways that history would only partially record, their names often surviving in coins, letters, and fleeting references. Yet their decisions echoing across the Mediterranean, from the Senate to the provinces, and from the palaces of Rome to the forts of Germania and the deserts of Mesopotamia, starting with Plotina, the wife of Trajan, a woman of remarkable intelligence and political acumen whose life had been dedicated to virtue, loyalty, and the subtle assertion of power. Unlike the empresses of the Julio-Claudian age, she wielded her authority not through scandal or manipulation of heirs, but through counsel, persuasion, and the cultivation of relationships, understanding that the strength of an empire could be augmented or undermined by the character of those who advised the emperor. And it was she who recognized the potential of Hadrian, guiding her husband in choosing a successor who would preserve Rome's stability. And she was deeply involved in the careful orchestration of court rituals, charitable acts, and public works, ensuring that her influence was felt both in the visible grandeur of the empire and in the quiet decisions that shaped policy, even influencing the distribution of funds for infrastructure, the favoring of certain senators, and the mediation of disputes that could have turned fatal in less temperate times, demonstrating a mastery of power that required no sword or poison, only the ability to understand the motivations of men and the mechanisms of governance, while her moral authority and public piety ensured that she was respected rather than feared, and that her counsel was sought, not merely tolerated, moving the empire forward in an age when the memory of Agrippina and Messalina's tragedies remained fresh in collective memory. Alongside Plotina, Faustina the Elder, wife of Antoninus Pius, embodied a different facet of feminine power in Rome. Her influence grounded in public perception, philanthropy, and the cultivation of loyalty among Rome's elites and provinces. Her reputation for charity, wisdom, and devotion to family earning her posthumous deification and a lasting legacy through the coins minted in her honor and the inscriptions praising her virtues, demonstrating that empresses could achieve enduring influence not solely through intrigue or manipulation, but through the strategic use of virtue, image, and subtle guidance of the emperor, with Antoninus Pius himself relying heavily on her judgment, consulting her on appointments, provincial administration, and ceremonial duties, while Faustina's role in fostering dynastic stability was crucial in an era when the empire depended on the orderly succession of rulers and the cultivation of goodwill among Rome's governing elite. Her daughter, Faustina the Younger, would take the mantle of influence even further, marrying Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, and navigating a court where philosophy, military command, and civic administration intersected in complex ways. Her life a careful balancing act of public presence, private counsel, and strategic alignment with her husband's vision for Rome, bearing multiple children while ensuring the continuity of the dynasty, maintaining networks of patronage, and engaging in charitable projects that reinforced her image as a woman of virtue and intelligence. And yet her power was not without controversy. Some accounts hint at her involvement in court intrigues, the handling of rivals, and the subtle manipulation of the emperor's decisions, demonstrating that even in the so-called golden age of the empire, women found ways to assert authority behind the veil of tradition and societal expectation, creating influence that was as profound as it was invisible to the casual observer, shaping laws, military appointments, and succession planning, often mitigating crises before they reached public awareness, and crafting the imperial narrative through festivals, dedications, and sponsorship of religious institutions, thereby embedding themselves in the moral and cultural fabric of Rome. Sabina, wife of Hadrian, similarly exemplified the combination of grace, intelligence, and subtle force guiding her husband through the complexities of a sprawling empire that demanded constant attention to military campaigns, diplomatic correspondence, architectural projects, and the administration of justice. And while Sabina's personal power was less overt than that of Agrippina or Messalina, it was arguably no less effective, for she exercised influence through the shaping of Hadrian's decisions, the management of court alliances, and the cultivation of public favor, ensuring that her presence reinforced stability rather than sowed chaos. Yet even she was subject to the delicate balance required of an empress, navigating jealousy, ambition, and the ever-present threat of rumor, all while maintaining the appearance of perfect virtue in a society that scrutinized women of the imperial household more than any other class. These women, along with others whose names are now only faintly preserved in the annals of history, collectively demonstrate the multifaceted nature of female power in Rome during the Nerva Antonine era, showing that influence could be wielded through moral authority, counsel, charity, and social networks just as effectively as through manipulation, seduction, or direct political action, with each empress adapting to the temperament of her emperor, the pressures of the Senate, and the shifting needs of an empire that required constant attention to law, finance, defense, and diplomacy, proving that behind the apparent tranquility of this period lay a network of subtle but decisive female authority that maintained stability, guided policy, and shaped succession in ways that traditional histories often overlooked, emphasizing that the invisible hand of empresses remained the most enduring and least understood force in Rome. While Agrippina's and Messalina's power had been dramatic, public, and often scandalous, the empresses of the later period demonstrated that control could be exercised quietly through intellect, tact, and social acumen, allowing the empire to flourish while simultaneously embedding women's influence in the very fabric of governance. Their council affecting decisions on taxation, military deployment, provincial oversight, succession planning, and ceremonial display, while their patronage of temples, festivals, and charitable works reinforced their legitimacy and created enduring networks of loyalty, ensuring that even as emperors came and went, the stability of the dynasty was maintained and the empire's institutions strengthened. Yet even in this ostensibly golden era, danger was never absent, for palace intrigues, factional rivalries, and the ever-present risk of assassination or exile required constant vigilance. And empresses such as Faustina the Younger and Sabina demonstrated that mastery of perception, timing, and personal influence was as critical as martial or political skill, with each decision, each smile, each public gesture capable of altering alliances and shaping the course of history, their influence extending to matters as varied as the welfare of citizens, the treatment of soldiers, the appointment of governors, and even the drafting of legislation. While the moral example they set influenced not only the imperial family, but the broader aristocracy, offering a model of virtue, discipline, and strategic intelligence that would echo through generations. Through the lives of these women, it becomes clear that Rome's power structure was never merely a hierarchy of men, that emperors, generals, and senators were often guided, restrained, or emboldened by the women who lived alongside them, and that the narrative of history, written largely by male chroniclers, has obscured the magnitude of their influence, reducing them to figures of gossip, scandal, or virtue, while failing to acknowledge the deliberate, calculated, and enduring impact they had on the empire's administration, succession, and legacy, demonstrating that the story of Rome cannot be fully understood without recognizing the empresses who wielded authority with wisdom, subtlety, and at times ruthless determination, shaping an empire that would stand for centuries, all the while remaining largely invisible in the annals of history, their shadows cast across the marble halls of power, guiding the hands of emperors, steering policy, and ensuring the survival and continuity of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. And in reflecting on Plotina Faustina, the elder Faustina the Younger, Sabina, and their contemporaries, one sees a pattern that the power of empresses in Rome was not merely derived from proximity to the throne, but from intelligence, social acumen, moral authority, and the careful cultivation of loyalty, alliances, and perception, allowing them to exercise control in an environment where overt power was denied, shaping the destinies of emperors and the empire alike, and proving that Rome's forgotten empresses were, in every sense, the invisible architects of history, whose hands molded an empire even as their names were whispered, maligned, or erased, and whose legacy, though subtle, nuanced, and often hidden, remained as vital to the story of Rome as the victories of generals, the decrees of emperors, and the monuments that still stand to this day, a testament to the quiet but irresistible force of women who mastered influence, survived intrigue, and left their mark on the eternal city, their lives a complex tapestry of courage, intelligence, diplomacy, and the endless negotiation of power in a world that demanded they be invisible while commanding the empire as fate. As the empire moved into the Severan dynasty, the stage was set for a new chapter of female influence, one that would demonstrate both continuity and evolution in the hidden power of Rome's empresses, beginning with Julia Domna, the wife of Septimius Severus, a woman whose intellect, political savvy, and cultural patronage would leave an indelible mark on the imperial fabric. Born in the city of Maesa in Syria, she brought to Rome not only her beauty, but an education in philosophy and governance, traits that allowed her to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics with precision and authority, quickly establishing herself as the central figure in the Severan court, attending councils, advising on military campaigns and shaping the presentation of the dynasty to both the Senate and the people, while her correspondence and engagement with philosophers, historians, and legal minds ensured that her voice influenced both policy and culture, creating an enduring legacy of intellectual as well as political power. And it was through Julia Domna's guidance that Septimius Severus maintained stability in an empire stretched across continents, leveraging her networks in the eastern provinces, securing loyalty among the legions, and mediating conflicts that could have escalated into rebellion. Her role as mother to Caracalla and Geta further complicating the web of influence, as she sought to balance dynastic ambition with personal survival in a world where imperial succession was both a prize and a peril, navigating the deadly rivalry between her sons with as much diplomacy as any statesman, demonstrating that maternal authority could intersect with imperial politics to shape the course of history. Yet her life, like those of her predecessors, was not without tragedy. As Caracalla's eventual murder of his brother Geta forced Julia to maneuver carefully to protect her position, maintain influence over her surviving son, and preserve the legitimacy of the Severan line. Her presence in court and on campaign illustrating that the Empress's power had evolved from the clandestine machinations of Agrippina to an overt respected authority, albeit still precarious in a world dominated by male rulers and soldiers. Following Julia Domna, her sister-in-law Julia Maesa would extend this legacy of female dominance in ways that reshaped the very notion of imperial authority, using family connections, political cunning, and social networks to elevate her grandsons Elagabalus and Severus Alexander to the throne, effectively controlling succession from behind the scenes and demonstrating that influence could be wielded without occupying the formal seat of power. Her maneuvering, including strategic marriages, alliances with key senators and generals, and careful cultivation of public perception to ensure that her family's claim was accepted despite initial skepticism and hostility, proving that the most potent empresses were not those who simply accompanied their husbands, but those who understood the levers of loyalty, propaganda, and institutional authority that governed Rome, shaping appointments, military commands, and public favor with deliberate, calculated skill, while also preserving the stability of the empire amid factional rivalries and the ever-present threat of coups and civil war. This pattern of female authority, though subtly different from the overtly scandalous or ambitious tactics of the Julio-Claudian women, was no less impactful, as seen in the life of Zenobia, the Queen of Palmyra, whose challenge to Rome in the 3rd century marked a dramatic intersection of female sovereignty and imperial confrontation. A woman who not only claimed her city's independence, but extended her influence across Egypt and Asia Minor, defeating Roman generals in battle and establishing a court that rivaled Rome itself in sophistication and culture, her rule exemplifying that the power of women in the empire was not confined to the ceremonial or advisory, but could be military, administrative, and dynastic, commanding armies, managing complex logistics, and negotiating with foreign powers in ways that few men in the annals of Rome could match. While her eventual defeat by Aurelian did not diminish the symbolic impact of her reign, which would echo as a warning and inspiration for generations, demonstrating that empresses and queens could assert agency, command loyalty, and shape the fate of the empire in ways that history could not fully suppress, their stories surviving in inscriptions, coins, chroniclers' accounts, and the cultural memory of Rome and its provinces. The Severan women, including Julia Mamaea, mother of Severus Alexander, continued this trend, blending maternal guidance with political authority, ensuring her son's succession, influencing policy, and maintaining stability in a fragile period, using education, moral authority, and administrative oversight to guide an empire that had grown too vast for any emperor to manage alone, proving that female oversight could complement the imperial rule in a partnership of intellect and influence, and that the image of the empress as passive consort was increasingly untenable. replaced by the reality of women who could sway decisions, protect dynasties, and mitigate the excesses of young, inexperienced emperors, often acting as de facto regents or advisors, while maintaining the veneer of propriety demanded by Roman society. Beyond the Severan dynasty, women such as Julia Soaemias and Julia of Palmyra continued to operate behind the throne, managing palace intrigue, advising emperors, and guiding the military and administration in periods of crisis, particularly as the empire faced the challenges of succession disputes, economic strain, and external threats. Their roles a testament to the adaptability of female influence, as they combined patronage, education, and strategic alliances to stabilize Rome while ensuring their family's prominence, subtly shaping legislation, appointments, and imperial priorities, and often serving as the moral and ethical compass in turbulent times, highlighting the complex interplay between gender, power, and perception in a society that revered military and political might above all, yet allowed out of necessity or skill the most intelligent and calculating women to shape the empire from within. Even in the later periods, when Rome's fragmentation and civil wars created new dangers, the precedents set by these empresses allowed women to exercise authority, indirectly influencing succession crises, controlling the loyalty of key commanders, and managing propaganda to legitimize claims to the throne, with their legacy evident in the survival of dynasties, the stability of provinces, and the cultural memory of an empire that consistently relied on their counsel, strategy, and intervention. From Julia Domna's intellectual and political prowess to Julia Maesa's dynastic engineering to Zenobia's audacious sovereignty, and the continued influence of Maesa and other Severan women, a pattern emerges. Roman empresses were not merely ornaments or victims of circumstance, but active agents in the construction, preservation, and sometimes the dramatic reshaping of the empire, wielding a power that was often invisible, sometimes lethal, and always consequential, proving that the story of Rome is incomplete without recognizing the hands, minds, and wills of these women who operated behind the throne, whose influence touched every level of governance, from the Senate to the battlefield, from the provinces to the palaces, and whose lives reflect the enduring truth that power, while often recorded in the deeds of men, has always been shaped, maintained, and contested by women whose legacy remains woven into the very fabric of history. Their impact as vast as the empire itself, and as enduring as Rome's marble monuments and its stories, which whisper of courage, intelligence, ambition, and survival across centuries, reminding us that the empresses who never held the official title of ruler were often the ones who most decisively determined the destiny of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known.